Hey guys, I'm back. Today we'll be ranking all of Kid Cudi's projects from worst to best. Now what do I mean by projects? Well, I'm referring to full-length studio albums, official mixtapes, and collaboration efforts. So why Kid Cudi? Well, if you've been watching my content for a bit now, it's no secret that I'm a huge fan of Kid Cudi. I'd even go as far to say I'm a borderline stan, which is embarrassing admitting you're a stan. It's not a title you want to wear proudly. Well, I've been listening to Cudi since 7th grade. At one point, I took out the last $20 out of my bank account to buy the album Indicud. Let's just say I'm better with my money now. I had bracelets, I had shirts, my best friend bought me this for my birthday, and you can ask him, I would legit wear this every single day. Over time, it slowly turned into a painting shirt, and I just can't seem to throw it away. I even used to run a Facebook page dedicated to Kid Cudi. It's not this one. I want to know who started this one. Anyway, now that we got my resume out of the way, I want to make one thing clear before we dive into his discography. Even though I'm a borderline stan, I will try to be objective. That way this video won't be me just gassing up Cudi saying all these albums are perfect, 10 out of 10. I'll be honest with my gripes and try to be as unbiased as I can. Well, let's start this. In my opinion, the weakest project of Cudi's is his mixtape Rap Hard. Now this was recorded in 2002 to 2003. At the time, Scott went by the stage name Kid Named Cudi. This mixtape didn't surface until November of 2011. I only included this project because it's considered official on Dat Piff, which honestly doesn't mean a lot because Cudi did clear the air on this when asked about Dat Kid from Cleveland. He said that he truly only honors A Kid Named Cudi as an official mixtape, but I included this on the list because it is important to the history of Kid Cudi. Now, this demo tape isn't bad by any means. I'd say that it's very much a product of its time. This demo is heavily influenced by the bling era sound, which I have no issue with. It's just not what I go to Cudi for. You have braggadocious raps, and Cudi repeating his name on every track. It just doesn't feel as personal as the records to follow after, which is the case with any first project from a starting artist, especially a demo. It takes time to find your groove and get more personal with your music. Anyway, I don't return to this tape. While revisiting it for this video, I only had 2 tracks I enjoyed quite a bit. Not Your Average and Party All the Time. I think this is mostly for the catchy hooks, and Party All the Time reminds me of that Eddie Murphy song, obviously. I definitely won't be returning to this anytime soon, but if you haven't listened to this before, it is very interesting to listen to. WZRD is a collaboration project between Dot to Genius and Kid Cudi. Now this obviously isn't their first collaboration they've ever done. Dot and Cudi have a long-standing relationship. This album came out February of 2012. It was Kid Cudi's first venture into the rock world and surely wouldn't be his last. Now, the rollout for this album had me extremely excited at the time. I remember watching the live stream that Cudi and Dot did where they premiered Rocket, which didn't even make it onto the album. Just a little side note, on Dot's Discord server he mentioned that if we could get WZRD to certified gold, he would leak a studio version of the track. It recently went gold, so maybe expect that soon, but I know Cudi did mention that there might be another WZRD album on the way, so who knows at this point. Anyway, when this album first came out, I loved it. It was constantly in rotation for me, but eventually it fell out of rotation for me over the years. Revisiting this album for this video, I expected to still love it and for its placement to be a lot higher. Sadly, this just wasn't the case. I found this album to be a bit boring. Not a lot of risks were taken, and at times it sounds overproduced. The guitar riffs feel like they were made in a program and they quickly overstay their welcome. Parts of the record become redundant, and the lyrics at times become repetitive. Well, getting the negatives out of the way, let's talk about the positives. I love the song Teleport to Me. The production on that song is beautiful, and the sample from Desire's song Under Your Spell was executed perfectly. I honestly think that Teleport to Me still holds up to this day and is one of Cudi's best tracks. Some of the other standout tracks are Upper Room, Afflictum, and Dr. Pill. I find Dr. Pill to be the most boundary-pushing song on the album. It's abrasive, and I just love how Cudi mimics the sound of the guitar on the hook of the song. I don't know, that hook on that song is gonna forever be stuck in my head. But that's just kind of how I feel about WZRD. It's not much, and it leaves a lot to be desired. In February of 2014, Kid Cudi dropped this album out of the blue with only a 2 hours notice. At the time, no one was really doing this except Beyonce, who did this with their self-titled album in December of 2013. Regardless, this was a huge risk at the time and definitely out of the norm. I remember immediately buying this album on iTunes and listening to it. This has always been one of the strangest albums in Cudi's catalog for me. I think the number one thing that holds it back are the instrumentals. Now, I don't have any issues with instrumentals being on albums. I think they can enhance the listening experience or hinder it. However, with the instrumentals on this album, they don't do much for me and leave me with more to be desired. The only instrumental I kinda like is The Return of the Moon Man. It feels super cinematic, but even that track drags on a little too long for me. Copernicus Landing, In My Dreams 2015, and Destination Mother Moon just sound lackluster to me. It feels like Cudi had a folder on his computer called Spaceship NASA Land Rover Sounds that he dragged into the program he was making the beats with. With all that being said, there are a handful of great tracks on here. Too Bad I Have to Destroy You is easily one of Cudi's best songs. It's definitely in my top 10 favorite songs by him. The instrumental is spacious, and Cudi just flows over it. The hook is catchy, and the hums are heavenly. Trouble Boy and Internal Bleeding are both simple yet effective, and Going to the Ceremony sounds like a Wizard leftover, but I still do enjoy that song quite a bit. Overall, this project is okay. I only ever return to it for Too Bad I Have to Destroy You Now. Now, this album is truly a mixed bag for me. There are some of Kid Cudi's best songs on here, but I think this album suffers from one thing: the length. I wish Kid Cudi would have taken advice from the song Fourth Dimension a lot sooner. This album feels incredibly bloated to me. There are tracks on here where the song is great and only needs to be maybe 2.5 minutes, but they end up being 4 to 5 minutes long. Personally, I'm okay with longer songs or albums, but a lot of the time Cudi says everything he needs to say in the first few minutes. It's like he almost feels the need to drag out the song, repeating the same ideas for an additional 2 to 3 more minutes. All I'm saying is a lot of fat could have been trimmed off the album and songs could have been left on the cutting room floor as well. This might be a hot take, but I honestly think if he cleaned this up at the time and added a few more tracks like Love, this could have easily been Man on the Moon 3. It has that same energy and that same vibe. Now, it sounds like I don't like this album, but I do. It's truly a love-hate relationship, however. This album is home to some of his best songs. Some of my favorite tracks are By Design, Rose Golden, Flight at First Sight, All In, The Commander, Baptized in Fire, Dance for Eternity, and Surfing. Surfing is an absolute banger and was such a great way to end the album. I also love how The Commander sounds exactly like the heart of a lion. I don't know how Cudi makes saying no, 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 yeah, sounds so good, but he just does. I do return to this record pretty often, but I find myself skipping through songs after they go on too long, or just listening to 5 or 6 tracks. Angels have no whiskey. This is arguably Kid Cudi's most divisive album, which I can totally understand why. Having a well-established artist switch up their iconic sound while simultaneously jumping headfirst into another genre is a recipe for disaster. I think another thing that ruffled up a lot of feathers was that prior to the release of this album, Kid Cudi was talking about Man on the Moon 3 a lot, making his core audience believe that it was in the works and coming soon. Only to have Kid Cudi say that the album doesn't exist and that this new album will be him at his 100% artistic self. That alone would make some people mad. So what do I think of this album? Well, I enjoy it quite a bit. I mean, it was number 9 on my Apple Music wrap-up from last year. I didn't realize how much I actually liked this album until I started making this video. I thought it was going to be lower on the list, and I know you did too, but here we are. So why do I like it? I think the number one thing I love about this record is how brutally honest it is. Kid Cudi puts everything out there in the open, and it's ugly, but it's genuine. I get that it's a flawed album, but I like it for its imperfections. Yeah, the Beavis and Butthead skits can be annoying and also dated, but it doesn't bother me that much. Yeah, the guitar riffs are simple and his vocals aren't the best, but that's why I enjoy it. It's hard to explain. The songwriting isn't mind-blowing, but there are still some gems here and there. I think it's more about the way Cudi delivered his lines that made it feel true to him. It feels like someone's descent into madness, and you're watching it happen in real time. Now, my biggest issue with the album are the bonus tracks. Except for Trauma. That song's great. Now, if I could, I'd swap out Trauma with Seance Chaos because I honestly don't like Seance Chaos at all. I wish Kid Cudi would have pulled a Mac DeMarco and dropped a separate album with all the demos and bonus tracks, because The Return of Chip Douglas is easily one of the worst songs I've ever heard in my entire life. Plus, I feel like Embers is the perfect ending to the record. Just hearing Cudi yell, "Thank you ladies and gentlemen, bye," is the perfect way to sum up this album. Again, I enjoyed this album. Cudi took major risks with this one and it paid off in my eyes. I can still understand why people hate it, but for some odd reason, it clicks for me. And hopefully I just didn't kill my reputation.
Open up your heart and...
In 2008, Kid Cudi dropped his breakout mixtape, A Kid Named Cudi. It was different, honest, and ahead of its time in my opinion. This mixtape really showcased Kid Cudi's talent and gave us a glimpse as to what's to come. Tracks like Down and Out, Cudi Get, and Is There Any Love highlighted his rapping capabilities. Songs like Man on the Moon, The Prayer, and 50 Ways to Make a Record not only displays his singing capabilities, but also his songwriting. Maui Wowie, Embrace the Martian, and Day and Night prove that Cudi can make catchy bangers. If you watched my other Kid Cudi video, you already know that this was my introduction to Cudi. So you can say this mixtape is pretty important to me. I don't have a lot of complaints with it. I guess at times it does sound a little bit dated, but Cudi still sounds great over all these samples, especially Heaven at Night. That was a great closer for the mixtape. The only tracks I don't care for are Pillow Talk and TGIF, but for the most part, it's an easy listen from start to finish. I find myself singing along with just about every song. That hook on Cudi spazzing is amazing. Anyway, definitely check this one out if you haven't.
Lord of the Sad and Lonely.
In 2013, Kid Cudi dropped his highly anticipated album, Indicud. Now, I think we were all curious to see how Cudi would follow up Man on the Moon 2. I know Wizard came out after, but we were all waiting on the next solo release from him. Indicud ended up leaking ahead of time. This resulted in Cudi moving the release date closer. At the time, I remember the day it dropped, I was waiting for school to be out so I could listen to it. Once school was out, I ran straight to the bank, took out the last $20 out of my account like I mentioned, walked to Target, and bought this CD right here. Since I missed the bus, I had to walk like 4 miles, and it took like 2 hours if I remember right. While walking home, I looked at the album just wondering what it was going to sound like. When I got home, I listened to it from start to finish and loved it immediately. So how do I feel about this record now? Honestly, it still holds up. I think at the time most people were pretty mixed on this album, but over time I've met more and more people who consider this their favorite Kid Cudi album, which honestly makes me happy, because for the longest time this album was slept on. I think with this album, Kid Cudi had a lot to prove, not only to the world, but to himself. You gotta remember, Kid Cudi left Kanye's label Good Music right before this album dropped. Songs like Cold Blooded have lines like, I got a vendetta was showing that I'm way better, feeling way worthless, the lost black sheep of good music, only good for a hook, huh? When you look back, Cudi was never really featured on other people's albums rapping. He mostly just did the hooks. So I can understand why he might feel this way. So this album was him showing his abilities. He even took on the task of producing the album. Anyway, I love how Indicud starts off. I know I complained about the instrumentals not doing much for me on Satellite Flight, but on here they set the stage for the album so well. The first track, The Resurrection of Scott Mescudi, gets you pumped for the album. I enjoy the instrumentals on this project. They sound hollow, minimalistic, and industrial at times, and it feels pretty cohesive. The biggest complaint I see with this album online is that there are a handful of tracks where it feels like Cudi is featured on his own song. I actually see this complaint often with albums, and I personally don't get it. Like, if the music's good, then who cares? But I might be alone on this, but I've never understood that criticism. I'd say the only track I'm not too big on is Afterwards, mostly because it drags, but overall I like all the songs on this album. Of course, some more than others. My personal favorite tracks are Immortals, Brothers, Just What I Am, and Lord of the Sad and Lonely. I'm not kidding, Lord of the Sad and Lonely is easily a top 10 Cudi song for me. I keep saying that. Maybe I'll do a ranking of all of Cudi's songs. Probably not, because I don't want to become a Kid Cudi YouTube channel, and that would take forever. And yeah, I think I'm all Cudi'd out after making this video.
This for my sanity, someplace,
I'll be completely honest with you guys. When the trailer for Man on the Moon 3 dropped, I was speechless. I called my friend who's also a huge Cudi fan and we were both freaking out over the phone. But I also got extremely nervous. Whenever an artist makes a sequel to an album, it can either go horribly wrong or they can come out on top. Usually it goes horribly wrong. Just a quick tangent, I think the most I've ever been disappointed with an album was Food and Liquor 2. Lupe, I'm sorry if you see this video, I know you won't because you hate Cudi, but being excited to hear a sequel to one of my favorite rap albums ever and having it be that mid was so heartbreaking. It hurt more than hearing Lasers, and that's saying something. Like, I want to buy that Food and Liquor collection on vinyl that's coming out for Record Store Day, but I don't want Food and Liquor 2 on vinyl. That's how much I despise that album. Like, I'd rather spend a little bit more and get the original press. But anyway, back to Man on the Moon 3. I was scared to listen to it because I was worried it was also going to let me down, and I wasn't prepared for that. This is an album I've been waiting for years, but hearing Beautiful Trip and then Tequila Shots put me at ease, and after that first initial listen, I immediately enjoyed the album. This album honestly just gets better with each listen, and I'm starting to catch those Man on the Moon vibes. In Cudi's interview with Apple Music, he mentioned that he didn't start making this album knowing it was Man on the Moon 3. He just was making music and it started coming together and he realized it was on that same wavelength as a Man on the Moon album.
Me being in the right place creatively. I was already in a really good place working on Intergalactic, going crazy on the Scott shit. Had that in the chamber, but then I was making something else that didn't fit those two projects. And I think after like 2 or 3 songs, I was like, whoa, like this shit really feels like a Man on the Moon.
Like your subconscious was guiding you in that direction.
Yeah. Like this is what the universe is telling me to make here.
Okay, so let's just get this out of the way. I know people make the Travis Scott comparisons, but I don't really hear it that much. Call me in denial, call me a D-writer, I don't care. But I'd say I hear it with the first few tracks, but after that, it sounds like standard Cudi. Yeah, you have ad-libs, yeah, you have auto-tune, but that's kind of it. And I'll be honest, the first time I heard Rodeo, I thought it sounded a lot like Man on the Moon. So I guess the teacher taught the student, and now the student is teaching the teacher, and things are coming full circle, which is awesome. But with all that being said, this album is solid in my opinion. All of the complaints I had with his previous solo album were resolved on this one. The tracks here are short and straight to the point. The instrumentals are layered and sound so polished. I love the beat switch on She Knows This. Cudi speeds up his flow and every time he goes, "This is for my sanity," that line just hits. There are a handful of lines that have just stuck with me since listening to this album. I appreciate how much Cudi had to say on each song. You can tell that a lot of tender love and care went into this project. I'm just so happy with how this album turned out. It's so good. My favorite tracks are September 16th, The Pale Moonlight, Sad People, and Tequila Shots. I have no complaints. I guess I could argue that this album was a little safe and not a lot of risks were taken, but I don't care that much. The music's good, the album's good, and I'm just so happy that this album finally came out. It really made 2020 a little bit better.
I feel free.
What is there even left to say about this album? I absolutely love this record right here for a number of reasons. I agree with most that Cudi and Kanye really brought out the best in each other on this record. The production is absolutely insane. Tracks like Cudi Montage or Free are some of my favorite tracks. Reborn is so powerful, hearing 2 damaged individuals come together to talk about how they fought their demons and became liberated. You can just feel that energy that Kanye and Cudi bring to this album. It just seeps through. It doesn't feel forced, it doesn't feel phony, it's never corny, and it feels so genuine. Cudi comes through with some solid verses on here too. He really held his weight here, considering that we got some great verses from Kanye on Reborn and Fourth Dimension. I'd also like to note that Kid Cudi's vocals sound so good on this album. They both brought their A game. Again, I love Free so much. That song hits in the car too, especially if you're singing it at the top of your lungs. It will make you want to quit your job. Overall, this was a pleasant surprise, and I hope to hear more collab records from the two. It's hard for me to put this album higher than the next 2 albums because they're all so good. We're kind of reaching that 10 out of 10 category right now, and I just love this album. There are literally no misses. It's definitely an album I return to frequently, and if you have been sleeping under a rock or something, go listen to this album. It's a really fun listen. This album is easily a classic. It's crazy listening to this album and just seeing how many people have been inspired by it to this day. I'm happy that Cudi has finally been getting his flowers as of late. It's been long overdue, honestly. I talked about this in my other Kid Cudi video, but this was the first CD I ever bought with my own money. I played the crap out of this CD to the point where it would skip constantly, and I eventually bought the deluxe version to replace it. Anyway, Man on the Moon is a groundbreaking album. We never have really heard someone in mainstream hip-hop tackle these kind of topics before. Cudi brought us into his world and talked about suicidal thoughts, depression, and loneliness. That's kind of the main theme of the Man on the Moon trilogy. It's not so much about space, but about isolation. Songs like Soundtrack to My Life, Kid Cudi reflects on his upbringing and past trauma along with the downsides of fame. This track sets the entire album and perfectly encapsulates what we're about to get into. I also think that sonically this was boundary pushing for a mainstream hip-hop release. The production is almost psychedelic and atmospheric. This is due to Cudi bringing in MGMT and Rat-a-Tat to feature and produce some tracks. I also think that Cudi's influences like Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix, and Electric Light Orchestra inspired that sound as well. Cudi's vocals make the album feel so genuine too, because they're not the best, they still sound good, but they feel so authentic. It may sound a little corny, but the singing feels as though it's coming from the heart. Well, this album still holds up after a decade. It's definitely a classic. My favorite tracks are Cudi's Own, Up Up and Away, Pursuit of Happiness, Heart of a Lion, and Soundtrack to My Life. I definitely feel like this is one of the most important albums of the 2000s. With that being said, I would put this one number 1 on my list for impact alone and enjoyability and all of that, but the next entry on the list is just so important to me and I couldn't put it above it. This album, in my opinion, is Kid Cudi's best body of work. In this entry in the Man on the Moon trilogy, Kid Cudi explores similar topics in addition to addiction. I think that the production on this record is my favorite sounding production to hear Cudi over. It's dark, it's gritty, but almost classy. This has always been my favorite Kid Cudi album ever since I bought it. I remember I had to hide the CD because I was terrified that my parents would find it. There's this picture of Cudi in the booklet surrounded by naked women. I got so worried that I had to blur them out with a black Sharpie. I wasn't sure if re-listening to all his projects in preparation for this video would change Man on the Moon 2 from being my favorite album, but it didn't. It was a nice experience and it brought back so many good memories, along with bittersweet ones. This album is very, very, very important to me. It seriously has been a crutch for so many hardships in life and continues to be. I don't know, I just feel better when I put this record on and listen to it from start to finish. I kind of think that most of the time people get caught up in being overly critical with music. I know I definitely do. This tends to result in people missing out on how an album can truly make them feel. I think that's why I enjoy Cudi's music so much. It's not about rhyme schemes, flows, or lyrical capability. For me, it's about how the music makes me feel, just the vibes. I know I might get called a hypocrite for saying this because I was so hard on Childish Gambino's album Camp, but I can honestly see how people are able to connect with that album. I know I once did. With Man on the Moon 2, I don't know what it is, but songs like Ghost, Please Don't Play This Song, These Worries, or Mr. Rager invoke such strong emotions even after all these years. It's crazy how the second half of this album is just so good. I think that the mood and the vibe is just perfect. Songs like All Along, The End, Trapped in My Mind are just so beautiful and poetic. And the first half of the album, I think that it just leads into that second half perfectly. It's setting the stage with Scott Mescudi versus The World, going into Please Don't Play This Song, where Cudi gives an update of where he's been with fame and even darker sides of fame with his cocaine addiction. The only thing I have to say about this album is I think Erase Me sounds so out of place. It's the only issue I have with this album, but I love Erase Me. It's a great song, but it does feel out of place with this album. But I couldn't put this album any lower on the list. It's just too important to me. Let's just end it on that. This album's fantastic. Please listen to it if you haven't. It's just so good. Well, that's my list. It was kind of different making a video like this, so let me know if there's any other artists you'd like me to do this on. Or if you even like me doing these, please be honest with me. I want to make you guys happy. I was originally going to make each album out of construction paper, but I just didn't want to stall this video any longer. It was taking so long. Here's 2 album arts. The Pain, Passion, Demon Slaying my brother made, and the Man on the Moon 2 I made. Special shout out to my brother. He helps me out with a lot of these videos. Him and I also did a little podcast talking about Doom 2 months ago. Please go check it out if you haven't. But thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a comment, a sub, a like, all that good stuff if you haven't. It really will help the channel out.
Chef's kiss.